Good morning, Richard Whitlock. I'd like to ask Tim a question, and you made reference to insurance as a market management system in these extremely volatile times. I'd like to ask, please, how do you, or I was going to ask the Minister, obviously, propose to implement this? Because this is a purely domestic programme, so it's nothing to do with the Brexit debate. How do you propose to implement it in sectors such as dairy, beef, lamb and fresh produce? And also, who will pay? Where's the budgetary contribution coming from?
Thank you.
Okay, shall I take that one? Thanks, Richard. I don't think I did mention insurance, actually. But it's something that ministers have mentioned, of course. And quite rightly, if we're looking at risk and volatility, which is I did touch on, there's a whole panoply of legislation currently under the Common Market Organisation of the EU, which provides a safety net for certain sectors. What's going to happen when we leave the EU? Depending on what the deal is, will we still have access to some of that, or will we be on our own? But in any case, in the longer term, we are looking at ministers are keen for us to look at a whole range of options, which would include insurance models. And the one that George Eustace has mentioned is the Canadian model. Some of them might be suitable. There might be bits or all of it, these models around the world that are transferable to the UK in a post-Brexit world. Some of them might be longer term because we just don't have the data, because we just have a different structure. So, I think they're on the table at the moment to be looked at, and we look forward to working with you to see whether they are viable and if they could work.
David Caffel.
Well, I don't want to talk about that specific question, Richard, but in my talk I talked about an unintended consequence, and obviously the ability to trade wheat forward is a key risk management tool. It's insurance, and thank goodness Paul Rook and the arable marketing team were alive to this, because we could have actually have lost that whole area of insurance, of risk management, through a piece of legislation that nobody had any idea that it might apply to agriculture. So yes, we're interested to hear schemes to add to it, but at the same time, as so often happens with AIC things, it's our job to stop things getting worse.
Thank you. We'll take the next question. There's a hand towards the middle of the room. Go ahead.
Hi, Robert Wodniak of Farm Brief. Will British English farmers be able to grow the stacked wheats that were likely to appear by 2020, coincidentally?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Sorry, we didn't quite catch the question. If you could try again.
The stacked wheats which are due to appear by 2020, coincidentally, will English farmers be able to grow them?
Sorry, Bob. One more time. Will farmers be able to grow?
English farmers, will they be able to grow those wheats that might be described as GM when they appear by 2020?
Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Right. Well, I think since the referendum, there's already been some heightened interest in GM. It's been interesting. I mean, like you, I read the papers. I've seen some big GM players around the world, and they've done studies which show that the consumer is ready to be more lenient towards what GM has to offer. Equally, there are some well-known daily newspapers that would believe that this consumer isn't. I think that. If ministers were here, they would just give this mantra about we want to follow the science. We want evidence-based decisions based on science. And the position we've always taken on GM is that if it isn't harmful to humans or the environment and there's demonstrable benefit, then it should be allowed. But of course, we've often been a voice in the wilderness because across the EU and beyond, there's strong resistance to GM. So, and this is my personal view, that in the longer term there might be opportunities, but I don't think as soon as we leave the EU I don't think anyone should believe that the country is going to be swathed in GM crops. I don't think that will happen.
The truth of it is that ministers are bullied on this by the Daily Mail. They're frightened of it. So they will willfully cast aside what science tells us because they're cowards.
I think
Tim's not allowed to answer, but the answer is yes.
Yeah, possibly. You might be right, Declan. On the other hand, if Owen Paterson was sat here, I think he'd probably give you quite a blunt answer to that, actually. He was very pro-GM. He was very bullish. I think he would have given you quite a robust reply to that one. I think, again, this is my personal, not my government hat on. I think there is space for a more sophisticated debate about GM in the longer term, and maybe what's in it for the consumer as much as what's in it for the farmer. But I think clearly the line is that we want to have science and evidence-based policies.
And I'd actually expand that somewhat and say we're not frightened of competition, providing it's fair competition. And I think the observers of trade talks over a long period of time always say that because agriculture in itself is insignificant, it's always the sort of thing that the politicians are likely concede at 2 minutes to midnight of the negotiations. And for example, if we're talking free trade agreements with countries like Brazil or Uruguay, we actually have to have equivalence, and we need the negotiators to understand the importance of fair competition.
Okay, thank you. I want to try and squeeze in one or two more if we have them. There's a hand over here, gentleman in the red tie.
Thank you. Jeremy Moody, Central Association of Agricultural Valuers. Clearly this is an enormous and complex subject with much to look and work over with you over the coming months for the future, but there are also certain immediate practicalities now. The immediate practicalities of economic management are, of course, in today's autumn statement, but an immediate practicality, I think, for many in the industry, whether in farming or in processing, is the practicality of access to permanent labour. And I'm clearly picking up reports of people sensitive now to whether they can staff properly for Christmas processing, with obviously the consequence of the fall of sterling, but more widely, the larger picture for the access to relatively unskilled and relatively low-paid labour on which these sectors depend, did depend before 2004, now depend on coming from within Europe, will wish to depend on elsewhere. So this is more of a plea, perhaps, than a question, but let's phrase it as a question. What can DEFRA do to try and give confidence to those people who want labour for the rest of this year and next year for their current business?
Okay, well, thanks, Jeremy. And I think all I can do by way of reassurance is to let you know that it's clearly something that all stakeholders are telling us. It's something that ministers have received loud and clear. And it's ultimately up to ministers and as part of the Brexit negotiations about how they address that one. But it's there, and I mentioned it, and I can't really say much more because I have nothing to say than I explained earlier.
Just to nudge you a little on the consequences of Brexit on this, it's fairly clear from what ministers have been saying that when they talk about controlling migration, they mean controlling the number of low and semi-skilled workers coming into the UK from outside of this nation. And as you say, that has an impact on the horticultural industry in particular. Should that industry now be giving serious thought to a big skills gap that they won't be able to fill with European migrant workers after the negotiating period has ended?
We're working very closely with the horticulture industry. I mean, I've lost count of the number of discussions we've had where stakeholders have explained this either to ministers or to us directly. It is complex. It's part of the negotiations. I think the importance has been received loud and clear by ministers. Ultimately, it's up to them what decisions they make. But the reassurance I can give you here today is that it's understood.
That will happen?
That it's an important issue that we need to address.
Fine.
Yes, I think one of the points I was wanting to make this morning is to look for other people who have common interest, and I think people like the NFU would be well advised to look at other industries and other areas that have similar issues, and industries, organisations such as the NHS spring to mind, where there has to be common ground of a common interest, and then it's a more cohesive picture that government can deal with, rather than simply horticulture or NHS or the meat processing industry or any other of these relatively fragmented parts of the equation.
I mean, I think that's a good point, David. That it is, of obvious importance to certain agriculture and horticulture sectors, but there are other sectors, and the particular ones are catering, care workers, and so on, which we know are again logged with Bayes ministers.
We all listened with great attention and gratitude to what you said on Brexit, but it's very difficult, Tim, not to come to the conclusion that this government has no plan. There is no current negotiating position because nobody has a clue what to do. Well,
I'm sure if George Eustace was here, he would give you a very clear answer on that. But it's simply out with my remit to start speculating about whether there is or not a plan, and if there is a plan, what it might involve. So I don't think I'm going to rise to that one, Declan.
Okay.
Can I just make a very
briefly,
quick,
yes.
Declan? I think the cartoon I showed said it all today, but I'd also say a very clear message once again to DEFRA is that we are here to help, and I think we've got the tools to help.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we don't have more time to allow more of them. Please join me in thanking our great opening speakers this morning, Tim Morton and David Kaplan.